Eleanor retired at 64 with $410,000 saved. She died at 79 with $437,000 still sitting in the account. 15 winters, thermostat locked at 66 degrees, because she never learned what a new furnace actually cost. Store-brand coffee, every single week. A 2009 sedan with a check engine light she'd stopped noticing years ago. A drawer of rubber bands, sorted by size, every December. She told her son she needed nothing. She finished with $27,000 more than she started with, $27,000 she never touched. In the bottom drawer of her desk, folded in half, sat a printed itinerary, 9 days in Ireland, $6,200 all in, printed back in 2018. Never booked. Here's the part that should bother you, Eleanor wasn't confused. She wasn't losing her memory. Nobody scammed her. And she was never, not once, actually broke. Eleanor did exactly what she was told to do for 40 straight years, and the reward was dying with a receipt for a life she never let herself take. My name is Yank, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time reading retirement data nobody asked me to read. If you've ever wondered why the people who saved the hardest seem to enjoy it the least, stick around, because today we're figuring out why you will almost certainly never spend the money you're currently killing yourself to save. And before you decide this is a video about your parents, understand something: the habit that trapped Eleanor doesn't show up at 65. It's the one you're building right now, today, with every deposit. Every time you move money into an account you've been told never to touch, the same mortality table that governed Eleanor's spending already has your name printed on it. Same table, same math. You're just further up the page. So let's start with the uncomfortable reality: Eleanor is not a sad exception. Eleanor is the base case. The Employee Benefit Research Institute has tracked the same households for decades, watching what retirees actually do with their money rather than what they tell a survey they'll do, two very different genres of fiction. And you should know what they found, because it's about to describe you. Retirees who entered retirement with $500,000 or more had, on average, spent down just 11.8% of it, not per year, but total, across 20 full years. 2 decades later, they were still sitting on roughly 88% of what they started with, after 2 decades of talking themselves out of the nicer hotel room. And it gets stranger. Roughly 1/3 of retirees in that data had more money later in retirement than on the day they retired. Not the same amount, more. They spent 18 years accidentally growing their savings, which is a genuinely impressive thing to pull off by mistake. Now, you might assume this is just what older generations are like: Depression-era instincts, thrift baked into personality. Fair guess, except the pattern isn't spread evenly, and where it splits tells you exactly who's responsible. I'll warn you now, it isn't the retirees. In that same dataset, retirees who had a pension saw their savings drop only about 4% over 18 years. Retirees without one, holding identical amounts of money, burned through 34%. Same age, same country, same grocery prices. One group barely touched their savings. The other ate through 1/3 of it. The only difference was the shape of the income. That's not a personality difference, that's a plumbing difference, and it points straight at the thing that's actually going to do this to you. Here's something about a pension you never appreciate until it's gone: a pension is a permission slip. It shows up on the first of the month whether you live to 70 or 107, and it doesn't care what the market did in October. You can't spend it wrong, because there's no principle to accidentally destroy. So your grandfather looked at the check, saw a number, and spent the number. Money in, money out. Simple. Your 401k is not a permission slip. Your 401k is a pop quiz you take every single morning for 30 years, and nobody ever tells you the answer, because to spend a lump sum correctly, you'd need to know 3 things: what the market will return for the rest of your life, what your medical costs will be, and the exact date you're going to die. Read that back. We took a job once handled by actuaries with mortality tables and entire departments of trained professionals, and we handed it to you, a person with a job and a commute. Good luck. Don't get it wrong. No do-overs. Congratulations on your empowerment, you get to pick your own funds. In 1980, roughly 38% of private sector workers had a pension. Today it's in the mid-teens. That didn't just change a product, it moved an enormous, unhedgeable risk off of institutions built to carry it, and dropped it onto you personally. So let's watch someone sit that pop quiz, because your turn is coming. Walter and Carol both retired at 65. Between them, $600,000 in a 401k, and about $45,000 a year from Social Security. No pension, house paid off, no debt. Walter kept every appliance manual he'd ever owned in a milk crate in the garage, which tells you most of what you need to know about Walter. They go looking for a rule, because there's always a rule. They land on the 4% rule, take 4% in year 1, adjust for inflation after that. 4% of $600,000 is $24,000 a year, plus Social Security. That puts them around $69,000, a good life. Except Walter keeps reading, the way you do at 11 p.m. when you should be asleep. And now he's got a problem. Bill Benjen, the man who invented the 4% rule, has since said 4% was always meant as the worst-case scenario, never the target. He now leans closer to 4.7%, and argues plenty of retirees could safely take 5 or more. Morningstar, running forward-looking projections, published a figure near 3.9% for anyone retiring this year. So the experts land somewhere between 3.3% and 5.5%. On $600,000, that spread equals roughly $20,000 a year, the entire difference between a retirement with plane tickets in it and one without. And here's what you'll actually do with that range, because it's what everyone does, you won't pick the average. You'll pick the lowest number. Because the lowest number can never get you in trouble. Walter and Carol settle on 3.5%, $21,000 a year, and they feel responsible about it, which is genuinely the strangest part, because feeling responsible is a pleasant sensation, and it costs them roughly a decade of experiences to keep having it. There's also a second number sitting in Walter's head, one he's decided can never be touched, ever. He's never said it out loud, not even to Carol. Hold on to that, because once you see what it is, you'll recognize it instantly. Now, at this point you'd expect the government to step in and fix all this. Here's the fun part, it technically tried. There's a law that forces money out of your retirement accounts, required minimum distributions. Starting at age 73, which sounds like the fix, right? The federal government legally mandating that you spend your own savings. Problem solved, everybody go home, look closer at the arithmetic. At 73, the required distribution divides your balance by 26.5, that works out to 3.77%. So on Walter and Carol's $600,000, the government's mandated minimum comes to about $22,600, which is actually less than the 4% rule would have given them 8 years earlier. Sit with that for a second. The mandatory distribution isn't the government encouraging you to enjoy your life. It's the government tapping you on the shoulder to say, remember that tax bill you deferred back in 1991? Yeah, it's time. And here's what you'll do with it, you'll take exactly the required amount, no more, and treat it as the number, not a floor, a ceiling, because it arrived in an official envelope, and official envelopes feel like instructions. Eleanor did exactly that. 15 years, 15 envelopes, 15 minimum withdrawals, never a dollar more. She believed she was following the rules. She was actually following a tax collection schedule. So why not override it? It's your money, after all, nobody's stopping you. Which brings us to the part that has nothing to do with math. Allianz runs a retirement survey every year, and this year 67% of Americans said they're more afraid of running out of money than they are of dying. Read that again. 2 out of 3 people looked at the 2 available outcomes and decided death was the more manageable one. That figure was 57% back in 2022. It's climbing that there's a mechanical reason you'll feel this too. You spend 40 years training a single muscle, save more, spend less. Balance goes up, you did good. Balance goes down, you screwed up. Do that for 4 decades and it stops being a strategy and becomes a moral framework. Then, on a Friday afternoon, somebody wheels out a sheet cake with your name on it. And on Monday, you're supposed to use the exact opposite muscle, at full strength, correctly, for the rest of your life, a muscle you have never once exercised. There's no cake for that transition. It shows up in a specific way. You'll spend interest without hesitation. You'll spend dividends. You'll spend your Social Security check down to the last dollar without blinking. But your principal goes straight into a mental drawer marked "Do Not Touch." It's why you'll happily spend a $400 dividend and refuse to sell $400 worth of the same fund that paid it, the identical money, just wearing a different hat. So the first time you watch that balance actually go down, it doesn't register as the plan working. It registers as failure. Loss aversion does exactly what it always does, losses land twice as hard as equivalent gains. Every withdrawal feels like a small wound. Every month you skip one feels like a win. Run that pattern 240 times and you get Eleanor, with an itinerary sitting in a drawer. Walter and Carol aren't immune either. Their portfolio grew last year, and they celebrated, 2 people in their late 60s, sitting at a kitchen table, celebrating the fact that they had successfully failed to use their own money. And I want you to understand what this actually feels like, because it isn't dramatic. It never feels like suffering. It feels like reading a restaurant menu right to left. It feels like your daughter offering to fly you out for the weekend, and you saying next month, next month, next month, for 11 straight months. It feels like standing in the appliance aisle doing mental math on a dishwasher while the salesman quietly gives up on you. It isn't misery. It's a slow, comfortable, permanent no. You'll never actually spend it, not because you can't, but because nobody ever gave you permission to. Somewhere in America right now, there's a retiree sitting on $1.2 million driving to a second grocery store because the chicken is $1 cheaper there. That isn't a character flaw. That's a system output. Now, here's where I need to be fair with you, because there's a version of this video that just says spend it, you'll be fine. That version is lying to you. The fear isn't irrational, it's pointed at one very specific thing, and that thing is real, long-term care. The most recent Genworth survey puts assisted living around $70,000 a year, and a private nursing home room near $127,000. Medicare covers approximately none of it, along with your teeth, your eyes, and your ears, a delightful discovery to make it 78. And you can't reliably insure against it either. Back in 2000, more than 100 companies sold long-term care insurance. Today, fewer than a dozen still do. The rest priced it wrong, absorbed enormous losses, and walked away. What's left raises your premiums after you've already bought in, and denies roughly half of applicants over 70. So it's a policy you can only comfortably buy while you obviously don't need it yet, a great business model, if you're the one selling it. Now add Fidelity's estimate that a couple needs roughly $345,000 for healthcare costs alone in retirement, a figure that excludes long-term care entirely. Then add the trustees' report showing Social Security's retirement trust fund running dry by 2032. So when you hoard, you're not being silly, and you're not being cowardly. You're self-insuring against a risk that the insurance industry itself examined and decided was too dangerous to touch. That's a rational response to an irrational system. You didn't fail a test. You were handed an actuary's job with no training, no tools, and told the penalty for getting it wrong was dying poor. And one more thing, stated plainly, because these numbers cut both directions, roughly 43% of American households between 55 and 64 have nothing at all in a retirement account. Nothing. Nearly half of Americans die with under $10,000 to their name, mostly because they never accumulated it in the first place. Not because they spent it. If that's you, this particular video isn't about you, and I won't pretend otherwise. Your problem is the opposite one, and it's harder. But if you've got a real balance and you're rationing it out of fear, that risk deserves an honest look. It's often said that about 70% of 65-year-olds will need some form of long-term care, true, but that figure counts your daughter helping you up a flight of stairs. Narrow it down to years of actual paid care, and it collapses. Only 4 to 5% need 5 years or more of it. Which brings us back to that number sitting in Walter's head, $300,000, roughly half of everything they own, walled off against an outcome that hits one household in 20. He's never said it out loud, because saying it out loud would make it sound like exactly what it is, a man mortgaging 30 certain years to fund one unlikely one. He's only ever said it to a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets don't argue back, which is the entire reason we like them. And here's the bill for that insurance policy, the one nobody ever prints on your statement. JP Morgan tracks real spending across millions of accounts. Between ages 60 and 64, you'll typically spend about $75,000 a year. By 90 to 94, that drops to around $52,000. Your spending falls more than 30% between 60 and 85, and not because you suddenly discover discipline at 81, it's because the money stops converting into experience the same way. There's a window in life where a dollar buys a hiking trip through Utah, and a later window where that same dollar buys a stairlift. Those are not the same dollar. And the whole tragedy of the 401k is that it trains you to protect the dollar while telling you absolutely nothing about the window closing. Run that against Walter and Carol. They took 3.5% instead of 5%, and they'll tell you they're being careful. What they actually did was move $18,000 a year out of their 60s and into their late 80s. On a spreadsheet, that's a neutral transfer. In an actual life, it isn't, because 67-year-old Walter can carry a suitcase up the stairs of a rental in Lisbon, and 89-year-old Walter is negotiating with a podiatrist. They didn't save that money. They rescheduled it onto a version of themselves who can no longer use it. Eleanor never even got the chance to reschedule anything. She spent 15 years rationing against a nursing home stay she never actually lived through. A stroke in February. Gone by March. The money went to her son, Marcus, who's 58, owns his house outright, and has a 401k of his own that's doing just fine. Marcus didn't need it. Marcus needed it back in 1996, when he was working 2 jobs and the transmission went out on his car. He received it instead at 58, which is roughly when most Americans receive an inheritance, if they ever receive one at all, and only about 30% of people ever do. So the money took a 15-year journey from a woman who wouldn't spend it to a man who no longer needed it. And the only thing it ever actually purchased was 9 days in Ireland that nobody ever took. If you're sitting there right now feeling something uncomfortable about your own parents, or about yourself, hear this clearly: nobody in this story did anything wrong. Eleanor was disciplined. Walter is careful. Marcus is grateful. Every one of them followed the instructions they were given, and the instructions were incomplete. You were taught how to fill the account. Nobody ever taught you how to open it. So what do you actually do about this? First, build a floor before you worry about the ceiling. The best annuity available to you is delaying Social Security until 70. It's inflation adjusted, federally backed, and every year you wait past 62 adds roughly 7 to 8% to your check, permanently. It's essentially the pension your grandfather had, except you build it yourself, out of sheer patience. Spending down your savings from 65 to 70 in order to buy a bigger guaranteed check for life isn't depleting your portfolio, it's converting it into the exact thing that let your grandfather relax. Watch what that does for Walter and Carol. Draw down harder for 5 years to delay both checks. And the guaranteed money underneath covers taxes, insurance, utilities, and groceries, permanently. The moment your floor covers your fixed costs, your portfolio stops being your survival and becomes your fun money. Same dollars, entirely different job description. And suddenly you don't need to be brave to book a flight. Second, once that floor is built, the money sitting above it is genuinely spendable. Say that sentence out loud, because your brain will not believe it silently. Third, the years between when you stop working and when you turn 73 are the single most valuable tax window of your life. Low income, no forced withdrawals yet. That's when Roth conversions cost you the least, and also, conveniently, it's while your knees still work. Fourth, if you're planning to leave money behind anyway, consider handing some of it over while you're still alive to watch it land. $20,000 is a rounding error to a 58-year-old, and a life-changing event to a 30-year-old. You're allowed to be in the room to see that happen. Just to be clear, I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this is financial advice. This is a video about data and incentives, and your specific numbers are your own to work out. But here's the question I'd sit with, the one Eleanor never got around to asking, and the one that would have cost her absolutely nothing to ask. You've spent your entire life asking yourself whether you can afford to spend the money. Nobody ever asks the other question. What is it costing you not to?